Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review, my written and video view series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at DriveThruRPG.com. This video will be reviewing the mini-adventure The Room with No Doors, designed by MT Black for the Call of Cthulhu tabletop RPG. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links if you're online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Those of you that have been following the channel for a while may remember that I reviewed the Call of Cthulhu Keepers rulebook. I believe it was the 7th edition because it got adapted to Roll20 in 2020. So I want to preface this review by mentioning the fact that I have not ever run a Call of Cthulhu tabletop RPG game, but I am familiar with how the rules work and the general themes and setting and all that based on that review. So this uses the Call of Cthulhu rule set, which is not to be confused with the, I believe it's called the Sandy Peterson Cthulhu Mythos, which uses the D&D 5e rules. This is its own complete Call of Cthulhu by Chaosium separate rule set, and it's very much focused on investigation. In fact, I believe the player characters are literally called investigators. So it's a lot of skill checks, it's a lot of fact-finding, it's digging up clues, it's searching for things. It is not a primarily, combat dungeon crawler. And I mention this fact because I mostly review D&D content and adventures, which combat is like bare minimum usually 50% of what you're going to be doing in any particular adventure. So that is not the case here. This is a completely different rule set. That being said, I think it does a really good job of reflecting the investigative focus of Call of Cthulhu, as well as obviously the horror angle. This does not feature any like elder gods or I guess technically there's kind of a cult type thing happening, but there's not really cultists so much. Instead, it's basically a straightforward haunted house, and it would be a pretty I think it'd be a solid introductory Call of Cthulhu adventure. Like, I could see myself running this adventure as someone who has never run a Call of Cthulhu adventure, because it doesn't look very complicated. The story is pretty straightforward. It does a lot of the classic, haunted house hauntings things, but it also does the Call of Cthulhu thing of having a lot of investigation on the player's end as they're digging up clues. And what I was really impressed with the most, probably, from this adventure is the handouts. The map is unfortunately not super great. It's just kind of a bare bones, sketch drawing of a map, which again, you don't really need. We don't need grids. We're not going to be big into fights and stuff, although there is basically a boss fight at the end, I guess. But it's disappointing that we didn't have a better looking map, considering that this is, in a way, kind of a dungeon crawl, at least in the second half, because it is a haunted house and there's stuff going on, so you definitely want to do the room to room thing. But I did really like the handouts. So the story for this particular adventure is there is a woman named Victoria Mansfield, and she had got involved in basically like a sex cult where they were, lewd and depraved and hedonistic, and she increasingly got more violent and sadistic to where the cult actually kicked her out. Like, she was, because they were big on consent as part of it, and she would break those rules. And she was kicked out, and then ultimately had her own plans, which involved, obviously I'm going to spoil the story as I review it, kidnapping a young man and drugging him, and like seducing him, like, to go with her to her house, and then drugging him, and then chaining him up inside a closet, and then boarding up that closet, and then basically just listening to this guy slowly die from lack of food and water. She like writhed on the bed. Really messed up stuff. And then, of course, the supernatural happened because it's Call of Cthulhu, and he becomes a vengeful ghost and ends up murdering her in her bathtub at some point later after she's, terrorized by him, his ghost. And then later on, the house changes hands eventually, and a woman rents it out to some people, and they end up going crazy, kind of similar to The Shining, honestly, where a kid gets, well, that part's different. A kid gets killed, and then the mom chases the husband around with the axe and ends up like chopping his arm off for it, and she gets arrested, and he flees town. And then they're like, oh shit, well, this place is like, messed up and evil. So that's where the investigators come in, as they are trying to figure out what is going on with this house. and can they clear it of any kind of ghostly problem. So the players are coming in as kind of the ghost hunters or exorcists or something, which is a cool plug. I think that's a neat thing to give the player characters a story hook. Is like, here's the information we know, which is the woman Hannah is giving them. Basically the only information that she knows is the latest bit I told you, which is the renters. Their child gets killed in a freak accident, which is of course the ghost, doing bad things, crushes the kid under a bookcase or something. And then the mom goes crazy, which is the ghost possessing her, and then chases the dude around the house. That's what they know. We don't know anything about the preview, who the ghost is or what happened to him and all that. That's on the players to try to investigate all this information. So we're given basically all these locations. That's all chapter 1, by the way, all that information, which is all very well, it's extremely well organized. MT Black always brings the A game when it comes to organizing all these adventures, making it really easy to parse and understand. I love the giant font. It's very easy to read. And, breaking down in bullet points, like exactly what the quest giver knows and what the players know. We even get a timeline at the bottom, which is really, really helpful. Again, all of this is just so useful for almost said the DM, it's the keeper in Call of Cthulhu. So chapter 2 is all about the investigation. Now the players could technically, because she gives them the key to the house, they could immediately go there. They could go there and skip all of chapter 2, in which case you are losing probably 50% of the adventure if you do that. And hopefully you are telling the players investigation is a major part of this kind of game, and you can pick up a lot of very helpful, relevant information if you do some investigative work first. Which would be, for example, going to the local newspaper because they ran an article about what had happened, and then you can dig up and find a newspaper clipping about the original, murder that happened, or death, I guess, because they weren't sure it was a murder because she just drowned in her bathtub. The ghost made it look like it was a suicide or something. You can go to the Arkham Sanitarium and talk to the woman who was possessed and chase the dude with the axe because she was arrested and committed to the sanitarium. You could go to the public library to get information about books that the Victoria woman checked out. You could talk to the neighbors. You could talk to the police. You could go to the exhibit museum where Victoria Mansfield used to work and figure out information about there and look through her final belongings that she had. And basically you're learning all of these important clues. And there's a few skill checks here and there if somebody's a little more belligerent or defensive for whatever reason. You could maybe roll a skill check there, or there's a library use roll for looking up information. There's a few skill checks, but it's mainly just on the players to figure out where we want to go to pick up all this information. And what really sells this section for me is that we get really, really, really well done handouts. The reward for all of these investigative legs of the journey is you're getting this information, and the information is presented in these incredibly themed handouts, which look like police reports. They look like newspaper clippings. They look like, a certificate of, this is really well done. It's not just a piece of paper that looks like a book. This is all done in that style. So it really adds to the immersion and it adds to the theme of being able to play this RPG when you're given these really nice handouts, including all these books, which I believe are all public domain, which, by the way, really smart use of using public domain books and artwork, which comes into play later, because you can just pull that shit up on Google and present it to your players and show them like the cover and the art and all that, and that's even more of the immersion. So really well done there. And what's helpful here is that a lot of these handouts, not only do they explain part of the story, but they're actually how you complete the adventure. Because yes, you can investigate the haunted house, you can even fight the Joseph is the victim, the dude that was boarded up. You can fight his manifestation, which is a bunch of humanoid ants and stuff. He basically controls insects because that's what kind of devoured his body. And when you open the secret door, he becomes like this, writhing mass of insects that can attack you. You can defeat him, but it doesn't get rid of the haunting necessarily. And to get rid of the haunting, you have to do one of the things that all these different handouts do. And it may be that the players only discover one or two of them, so maybe that's all they know in terms of how they can handle this. Versus if they discover all of them, maybe they'll have okay, we've got a choice of which one of these should we do. And some of them make it more obvious than others in terms of we need to drive a new nail into the floor of where he was killed, and then that will suppress the spirit completely. Now, technically it doesn't get rid of the spirit, but you have essentially clicked it off. And it does mention in the text in an epilogue that, like, you know, at some point in the renovation, somebody's going to randomly remove that nail, and that's going to cause the spirit to happen all over again. So there's essentially one right answer in terms of permanently getting rid of the spirit, and the other two are more like temporary successes. But in terms of the adventure, you basically complete no matter what. But I thought that was a really good way of essentially how you completely complete the adventure. It's not just the boss fight, it's that you actually have to exercise this spirit, and to do that you have to do this investigative work and learn all this different material based on basically finding books that Victoria herself tried to use to excise this ghost, because you can follow like her, you know, checking out different books or books that she had, you know, at her office or something, and she had like pages earmarked, and that's how you learn it. So I thought that was a really cool way of doing the clues without making it too, you know, confusing or obtuse for players to try to figure out what they're supposed to do. Instead, it becomes a really straightforward series of clues, and as you can see, just really well organized, lots of great art. The use of bullet points is very helpful as a keeper to be able to look through and determine what is the useful information for me. It does a good job of like all the NPCs. It's got just a one-sentence description for everybody. Like, let's see, you're met by the no-nonsense head of the facility, Dr. Eric Hardstrom, who has dark hooded eyes and a stiff gray mustache. Successful persuade roll sees the characters escorted to an upper level solarium by an orderly. That's all the information really we need for this one time, you know, NPC who just basically guides them to the woman at the sanitarium. So really good use of NPC descriptions there. And then chapter 3 is the haunted house itself. So again, we've done this investigation. There are 10 of these locations, by the way. The players do not have to visit any of them to complete the adventure, but they could do all 10. They could just do some of them. They could fail some checks and succeed in others. You know, it does a good job of making sure the players can't ever fail and are completely like stumped, because again, they could just defeat the spirit, and that technically temporarily, you know, turns them off for like a week or something, which isn't great, but hopefully they figured out a way to excise the spirit in some way. Now the actual, I loved all that, by the way. I had nothing but positive things to say about the first 2 chapters. Chapter 3 is the actual haunted house. I'm going to call it a dungeon crawl, because it's kind of what it is. And it does the classic haunted house thing of like, hey, it's kind of up to the keeper to, you know, throw some scary stuff in there, because the spirit can, you know, his powers are he can mimic voices, create the sound of footsteps, control insects, which is used throughout the thing as ants like spelling out different creepy phrases, which is done really, really well. His one big ability, and of course he can, you know, make plates rattle and create. It's very Poltergeist, if you've seen that. And he can possess somebody, or I guess, I don't know if he's possessing people, or just, it says filling them with rage and bloodlust. So he just like turns on somebody to go kind of crazy, which is kind of Shining at that point. So a little combination of very classic, you know, haunted house things of Shining and Poltergeist. And it's a decent little crawl. There's, you know, some fun things where it mentions, you know, and you as the keeper can decide which ones you want to do when, but throughout each house, there's basically something spooky that happens. Like there's, you know, the front door slams when they get to a certain room, and you hear footsteps on the upstairs, or, you know, one of the bookshelves may slam down, which is of course how the one child was killed. You know, plates in the kitchen will smash whenever they're looking at, you know, paintings, and it's that's a pretty good job, and it's very, you know, thematic to a haunted house. My main complaint is that it never really gets more interesting than that. And partly what makes haunted house movies and good horror movies always have a proper pacing and escalation of threats, to where at the beginning it's all very creepy and you're just seeing furtive glances and everything, and then by the end there's just fucking ghosts flying in your faces, and it's gotten to where this huge like panic mode. And this one kind of lacks the second half of the big scares to me. There's just not, you know, like The Shining does such a good job of this, where it's, you know, really just subtle creepy stuff at first, you know, zooming in on the door and the kid bicycling through and seeing the twins and all that. And then by the end of it, she's, you know, running through the house, and there's what is going on there? And you've got the creepy, you know, woman in the, I'm spoiling a lot of the Shining movie, by the way, the 70s one. There's the 2 figures that are dressed in the heads doing some lewd sex act, and there's, you know, she's running through the hallway seeing all this really creepy stuff, and he's got the axe whenever he goes fully insane, basically. That's like the level that we never quite get to. There's only 2 very scary things that happen, but they're more action than scary. Which one of them is the Joseph character does his bloodlust thing whenever they make it to the bedchamber, which basically turns somebody, one of your own party members, investigators, into a combatant. They become possessed if they fail their power roll, and they have to violently attack the nearest person for 1d6 plus 2 rounds. That's very scary, obviously. That can be spooky. But it kind of just turns into a combat, encounter at that point. And then the other spooky thing is that when you actually reveal the secret boarded up room where he was killed, you find the remains, and then it manifests into this writhing horror, which does have its own unique stat block, of like this, massive insect maggot thing. And doesn't really, weirdly enough, have any supernatural powers at that point. It's just kind of this, almost like a swarm of insects that just kind of attacked, and that's a pain in the ass to fight for sure. But it doesn't really it just kind of lacks any of its spooky stuff. What I was disappointed in is we didn't get any of the big scares that aren't just straight combat focused. And I was really hoping, for example, when you first make it in here, you may only be tangentially aware of the original horror thing that happened, which was her boarding this guy up for her sick pleasure, and then him as a ghost murdering her. So I was really hoping we would get some more bits of her, like maybe the classic, shining bathtub scene, because that's where she died, get her in the bathtub. We didn't really get that, and we didn't really get, like, the kid who was killed, like maybe there's a bookshelf down and you find out, I was hoping that you would, like, enter a room and you would see, like, a ghostly scene play out or something. More like storytelling, I guess, haunts versus just spooky poltergeist stuff is what I was hoping for. A lot of haunted houses do a good job at the environmental storytelling, where you learn what happened based on the creepy stuff that's going on. And instead, this one, there's a whole investigation side where you learn all of that before you enter the haunted house. And then when you enter the haunted house, you don't really learn a whole lot of more information. Instead, just a bunch of little creepy stuff happening. A lot of the beginning, like the first half of the Poltergeist, the first half of The Shining, that kind of creepy stuff happening. But then it never quite builds up to that second half. Instead, we just get the one possession of a character, or maybe multiple characters if that goes through, several people and they fail their power rolls. And hopefully they find that secret room, and then, they'll fight basically a boss fight there. And then they have to do something to excise that spirit based on the information that they learned. So I don't know if it was just too short, or if I wanted a few more interesting, like, environmental haunts that told more of the story. But it just, to me, it ultimately lacked a little bit in the big scares. And I feel like you could have tied the big scares with the storytelling, which would have been like, maybe the woman is dead in the bath. Like, you get a flash of the woman's body in the bathtub and she's ghostly. Maybe she reaches out or something, and then that was the whole scene. It's not there's no combat roll. Maybe there's a sanity check or something there. Something more like that, and maybe the kid, like, crawling out of the bookshelf or something, or the woman runs into the you can do those kind of scares and have it be purely, and the Call of Cthulhu is set up for that, because you have those sanity rolls so that you can attack people's sanity without literally attacking them physically. And this one, I feel like, just really lacked in that department to a disappointing degree, because it had set up all of these potential big time scares and just really didn't use any of them. Aside from the obvious, which is once you determine the actual ghost who's causing this, which is not the woman who was drowned in the bathtub, it was actually her victim, and he becomes that, writhing mass of insects, which is kind of oddly mundane for the fact that he's got all these other crazy powers that he can do in terms of the supernatural, and he's just really kind of a pile of bugs in the end. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for The Room with No Doors. Pros: it is a well-organized adventure with succinct details for all 10 investigation locations. Basically, chapters 1 and 2, and chapter 3 to some extent too, with just the way it's organized with the bullet points, telling you, what the spirit can do throughout the house, how the players can learn all this information, what kind of checks they need, those are bolded information. It's just so well organized and put together that makes it very, very friendly for keepers of any skill level to be able to handle. Pro: smart use of public domain books and art pieces. I thought that was incredibly clever. I don't know if that's the case with all the Call of Cthulhu adventures, but the fact that Black really utilized stuff that's in the public domain, which means you can just Google search, the paintings that are used in the house, or those books. If you want to more thematic about it, you could go check out a book, and pass that to people, and even earmark the handout if you want to do that instead of use the handout here. Like, that really adds to the immersion level in a really smart way. And pro: over a dozen richly detailed, heavy thematic handouts. My goodness, these handouts are so good. I was very impressed. The fact that they're actually done like, library cards and death certificates and newspaper clippings instead of just, black and white paper that's supposed to show that. I thought that was really took the extra step to creating that immersion. My cons: I summarized my big con with the final horror haunted house with that it pulls punches when it comes to the bigger scares. It really kind of lacks those big scary moments that a lot of classic great horror movies. I don't read a lot of horror books, but for movies, they reach that escalation, and this one I don't feel like ever really reaches that point. Yes, you could make the possession thing of people going mad really scary, but ultimately it's still a combat encounter. So I was hoping for more, scary stuff that wasn't necessarily just straight combat, and I feel like it really lacks in that regard. And also, you could have combined that with some more environmental storytelling in the house itself, rather than just in the investigation section, which I think would have gone over very well. And my other con is, of course, the map is, it does its job, but I would have preferred, as somebody who, again, plays on a VTT primarily, it would have been really nice to have the details, the color, and everything, because, no, we're not really necessarily doing combat in here, but we are going room to room and looking at things, and, I'm going to be using tokens and stuff if I'm going to run this, so that would have been very nice to have. Final verdict, though lacking in cults and elder gods, the straightforward haunted house investigation in a room with no doors would make it easy to run, if overly tame, one-shot introductory adventure for Call of Cthulhu. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Instant Lose, Roger, Stan, Nathan, and Alex. And gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marco Stade, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Skalanic, Farty Mc, Butterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, Baboon, Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.